November the 19th, in fact, of 2018, I had blood work run at my doctor's office. It was on the 19th that I went in to get the results of that blood work. And the blood work showed that my A1C was way too high. My blood sugar was way too high. Up until that point, I hadn't been diagnosed diabetic or anything. It runs in my family, so I was always concerned about it, but I hadn't been diagnosed with it and wasn't having any particular, problems that I was aware of. But my A1C came back with that blood work at a 9.9, which is extremely high. 9.9 is way too high. So my doctor wanted to start me on metformin, but he did give me the option to try to lose a little weight, come back in 3 months, try to really watch what I eat, lose some weight, come back in 3 months. He would run the A1C, the hemoglobin A1C test again, and see where we were at. But if it was still too high at that point, then we would begin looking at starting on metformin and trying to get it under control with medication. So prior to this time, like I said, there were people in my family who are diabetics. So I, was kind of concerned about diabetes and concerned that at some point in my life I might develop it. And I had come across a video by Dr. Sarah Hallberg, and it was a TED Talk. She was doing a TED Talk, and it became a very popular TED Talk. One reason may have been because she said something controversial in there. She said that in order to treat diabetes effectively, or to reverse it, or keep it under control without medication, I forget exact wording she used, but she said the first step was to ignore the guidelines by the American Diabetic Association. That's almost heresy, to say that, but it did get me thinking. But again, I wasn't diagnosed as diabetic at that time, so it didn't, raise any big flags for me. What she talked about doing with her patients was a low-carb, high-fat diet, and I guess similar to what we now refer to all the time as the keto diet, the ketogenic diet, which I have come to learn more and more about, and we'll talk about that at a later time. Another video I ran across on YouTube at that time was by Dr. Jason Fung, and that's what I would like to dedicate this particular video to, is the topic of Dr. Jason Fung. He is a nephrologist, a kidney specialist, an MD, a nephrologist, kidney specialist in Canada, and almost all of his patients were obese diabetics that needed to be on kidney dialysis. That's why they were in his clinic. And for years, he noticed the pattern of these patients just getting worse and worse, and having to go on, most of his patients were on insulin, and most of them had to go to higher and higher doses of insulin over time, and they just never really seemed to be getting better, and it really bothered him. And he would recommend low carb diets and low carb, high fat, those kind of diets. And he would have them keep a diary or a journal of what they were eating, and they would come back and he'd realize that they really didn't understand, or if they understood, they weren't following, but he assumed they didn't really understand what they were supposed to eat and not supposed to eat, because they were still coming back showing that they're eating pasta and rice and things that they were cutting out, maybe sugary soft drinks and table sugar and things like that, but they were still, taking in a lot of carbohydrates. So anyway, somehow he stumbled across the idea of fasting And at first he thought it was crazy. A friend of his was just talking to him about fasting, I believe, from a religious point of view. And he thought it was just a crazy idea. But then he began to really think about that and noted that all the world's major religions, whether it's Christianity or the Jewish faith or Islam, they all, for centuries, have done fasting in some form. And it didn't kill anybody or make them terribly malnourished or anything like that. And so he got the idea, I'm shortening this, but he got the idea to possibly start trying that with some of his patients. He had first discussed this with his assistant, or I'm not sure if she's considered an assistant or more of a partner, but Megan Ramos. She's not a medical doctor, but she is very instrumental in his clinic in working with his patients on what they call the IDM, the Intensive Dietary Management Program, IDM, Intensive Dietary Management Program. Megan handles a lot of that in their clinic, and she would be another good one to search out on YouTube. To my knowledge, she doesn't have her own YouTube channel. I don't think Dr. Fung has his own YouTube channel, but you'll find both of them all over YouTube because they're being interviewed by a lot of people who are interested in these areas. But at any rate, when I watched Dr. Fung's, I ran across him for the first time on YouTube in a video lecture he was giving talking about intermittent fasting, which I almost myself prefer to call time-restricted eating, because some people are so fearful and have such a negative reaction to the word fasting. And with the way it's used clinically, calling it time-restricted eating is probably a better idea anyway, because most people on intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, they eat every day. I certainly do. I eat every day, but I try to reduce the window of time that I'm eating, instead of eating from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, which probably used to be, with snacks here and there and stuff right up until bedtime. That was probably closer to my routine prior to all these changes I made. And so that's a 16-hour window. You don't eat in the middle of the night while you're sleeping, so everybody fasts for 8 hours. But if you eat from the time you get up until the time you go to bed, if you're sticking a little something in your mouth, whether it's a snack or what, that's a 16-hour window of eating. What I did initially and what is recommended for people who want to do time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting is to try to reduce that window to 8 hours. Perhaps eat your first meal at 11 o'clock in the morning and stop eating by 7 o'clock that night. That's an 8-hour window. I did that at first and quickly realized that's very doable, very easy, as a matter of fact. And so I changed to a shorter window, a 6-hour window, by trying to eat my first meal at 12 or 12:30 and then not eat anything after 6 or 6:30. And if I started at 12, if I had my first meal at 12:30, then I would not have anything to eat after 6:30, and that gave me a 6-hour window. But you see how it works. And then when you realize you can do that, then you say, well, let's try a 4-hour window. And eventually I got to the point where I was doing one meal a day, and I did that for quite some time, and it worked extremely, extremely well. Again, I say that I lost 75 pounds. In reality, I lost about 82 pounds. I went from 250 pounds when I started down to 168, which is 82 pounds. Shortly after hitting that bottom, I was having a lot of people tell me that I'd gotten too thin at that point. And looking in the mirror, I thought maybe they're right. And I slowly gained back up to around 175, which is where I stay now. I've been at that for over 9 months. And so that's down 75 from my starting point of 250 pounds down to 175. That's a 75-pound net weight loss over that period of time, and I've stayed real steady at that. The important thing is the changes it made in my health. When I went back to see my doctor 3 months later to get my A1C done, I remember the first time in November the 19th, I was told that my A1C was a 9.9, which is way, way too high. Definitely in the diabetic range. When I went back 3 months later, it was at 4.9, and that's extremely good. Now, this was without medication. And I stress that point because you can't do all the things I did if you're on medication. If you're taking insulin or metformin or any of the oral medications for diabetes, you have got to work with your doctor. You can't just start fasting and do all the things that I did. And I'm not trying to give anybody medical advice here at all. I'm just telling you what I did, just telling you my story and the profound effect that Dr. Jason Fung had on me. Dr. Fung has written 3 books. The first one is called The Obesity Code. The second one is The Diabetic Code. And the third one is The Complete Guide to Fasting. He wrote that, he co-authored that with Jimmy Moore. I'm not as familiar with Jimmy Moore, not necessarily endorsing him. I'm not endorsing or failing to, and or saying anything against Jimmy Moore. He may be great, but I'm just not real familiar with him. I haven't studied a lot of his stuff, but I've gotten all 3 of Dr. Fung's books and have read them cover to cover and underlined and made notes and followed them like they were the Bible. Honestly, I probably could have done with just one of them, but I was afraid I was going to miss something. So I got all 3 of them. And the second one, the Diabetic Code, probably would have been enough because there's a lot of repetition in his books, and you probably do pick up a few things here and there from the different books, but that one book alone, was enough to transform my life. And I can't recommend Dr. Fung highly enough. He is, many of you may be familiar with him by now because he's helped thousands and thousands and thousands of patients through his clinic, his nephrology clinic, and the IDM program, the Intensive Dietary Management Program, which again he partners with Megan Ramos on that. You can find a lot of good interviews from her on YouTube. And again, my channel is brand new. It may not always be about these dietary issues or diabetes, but I felt it was important to start with that because I never had to go on diabetic medication. My diabetes or my A1C stays perfectly normal now by controlling my diet. During the course of the weight loss, I was also able to get off the 2 blood pressure medications that I was on, which was a big deal. That wasn't even a goal. I was just trying to take care of the blood sugar, but I was able to come off of both blood pressure medicines and my cholesterol medicine. And I slept with a CPAP mask for sleep apnea. Previously, I no longer need that. I don't take medication for anything, no more CPAP. I sleep so much better. I've got so much more energy. My wife can testify. I used to come home, plop in my recliner and fall asleep, never wanted to go anywhere, never wanted to do anything. Now I'm full of energy. I can't stand to just sit around and do nothing. I'm excited to live life and excited about the future, about retirement and the things that'll happen after I'm able to retire and the way I want to do that. And my videos will get into some retirement planning and those types of discussions in the future in the process. But I'll stop for now and we'll cover more of this in future.